Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for Alumni Night In, preparing for international travel. We hope that the sun is shining brightly wherever you are and that your Ram Pride remains strong. We're so excited to share this presentation with you this evening and to answer all of the fantastic questions that you submitted. I want to thank all of you for participating this evening. We would love to see you put in the comments section where you're watching from, and if you're an alum, what year you graduated from, wherever you're tuning in from. We're so glad that you are here. Many of our attendees tonight are CSU Alumni Association members. Membership makes so much possible, including events like this at no cost to all of you. To learn more about membership and all of the Alumni Association, please download our mobile app. The CSU Alumni Association has many virtual events coming up, as well as many past event recordings that are available to you. I'll include links in the comments here shortly so that you can see our upcoming events calendar and subscribe to our YouTube channel. In just a moment, I will put in the comments my contact information if you have any trouble with technology. We will be sending out the recording of this webinar and some additional resources in the next week or so be on the lookout for that. And later on in the event, we will provide in the comments a survey. If you have a moment to fill that out, we would greatly appreciate your feedback. And now I'm excited to introduce you to our fantastic speakers for this evening from our very own International Programs Education Abroad Office. Please welcome Laura and Derek.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dakota. It's really nice to be here, and it's nice to be joined by our alumni. As you probably saw from the announcements, I'm Laura Thorns, and I'm the Director of Education Abroad. And I'm joined by my colleague, Derek Smallwood.
Hello, everyone. It's great to see you this evening. As Laura noted, my name is Derek Smallwood. I'm CSU's International Risk Manager, and we're excited to talk to you about this subject tonight.
Yeah. So we have kind of several parts to this evening. The first part is we're going to just kind of give an overview of education abroad at CSU. Likewise, an education abroad overview for this last year, especially during the pandemic. Some of the structural resources that we have within CSU to help assess risk and kind of make informed decisions about international travel. We will also take time to make sure you have access to a lot of the tools we use to research what's going on in different countries and how we kind of organize our thoughts about, is it time to go abroad? Is this the right place to go abroad? And what we do as well to inform students about known risks versus perceived risks in these complex times. And then finally, certainly last but not least, we will have some of our students and staff who are able to go abroad this semester. So we'll have three different kind of groups represented at the very end, talking about their experiences internationally, traveling internationally, and kind of what they learned through that all. Likewise, we will answer questions at the final part of the presentation. So I hope you'll stay the whole time. We promise to make it pretty engaging. And we'll leave plenty of time for questions so that you can pick our brains about what we know, or at least, like say, what resources we can connect you with. So with that said, let's go ahead and move to the next slide and talk about international education abroad updates. Okay, so like I say, I want to start just by sharing kind of what CSU has been doing over the last several years, just to give you a context of how many students we're serving. I'd like to start with this slide because I am hoping that somewhere in this group we've got some Lincoln University alumni, so some students that maybe went on exchange or study abroad with Lincoln. If you have, please throw that in the chat because that's a pretty large group of students. And we'll have some active students there coming to talk later on about their experiences in New Zealand. So, all right, education abroad at CSU is pretty robust. So last year, we were on track to send about 1,700 students abroad, which means that about 1 in 5 students have an international experience before they graduate, which has grown a lot over the years. And we'll talk about kind of our goal setting in just a few minutes. So when we talk about students going abroad, we're not just talking about traditional study, but we're looking at study, research, internships, service learning, conferences and workshops, all types of international engagement that have an educational focus. Some universities only focus on the study piece of it or only talk about undergraduate experiences, but we're pretty fortunate at CSU that we look at all of it and we track it, and it makes it very exciting because we send students to some very unique destinations doing really forward-thinking learning as well as work. So as I mentioned, like say, currently at CSU, students have the opportunity to attend over 1,000 programs. We have a lot of opportunities. Many of them are CSU managed programs that we've developed internally, and many are partnerships that we've managed around the world with different organizations. Students in a typical year will go to 80 different countries, and many of these are the well-traveled European or on the beaten path programs, but we have just as many students going to countries that are less traveled by the typical travelers. And yes, we do have students touching every single continent in the world, including Antarctica. That's a fun thing, like I say, at the international research CSU does. There's a very large footprint and a lot of interesting engagement. In addition to the geographies and program types that students can go on, there's also programs offered all year round. So summer, semester, winter break, spring break, fall break, for anywhere from a week to a year. So unlike when I studied abroad nearly 30 years ago, the field has grown quite a bit. It's evolved, and we're always thinking about ways to get new students and new majors to have this international experience, because we think it's really important for their learning, not just personal learning, but academic learning as well as professional outcomes. So just to benchmark some of the goals we've set over the years and what we've been working for. In 2015, we joined the International Institute for International Education's Generation of Study Abroad commitment. At that time, we decided as a campus that we wanted to increase our enrollment on a regular basis, and that we needed to be creative about how we do that. So when we signed that goal, we had about 1,200 students going abroad for, once again, study, research, internship, service learning, all the types of learning. And we decided, let's increase that by 100 new students per year for the next 5 years. As I mentioned, if the pandemic didn't get in the way, we were definitely on track to reaching that 1,700 student goal. And we hope that once the pandemic settles down, that we'll hit those numbers again. In order to reach those goals, it wasn't just about advertising or telling students they should have this experience, because we noticed that 80% of the students coming into campus identify that they'd like to have an international experience before they graduate. And the reality is, not all of them do, right? We saw that it's 1 in 5, maybe getting closer to 1 in 4, but we still had a lot of work to do. And so in identifying who's going abroad and who's not going abroad, we had to think seriously about all the barriers of why a student might come with interest and not actually have the experience. So over the last 5 years, as a campus, we've been chipping away at, how many programs do we have? Do they meet the diversity of opportunities students want? Do they have a diversity of timing so that students that maybe need to work during the summer or during the semester can still find a time to have this international experience? What about first-time travelers? Maybe they're not ready to do a semester, so could we give them something shorter so that they can learn how to travel internationally and how to have a really academically enriching experience that's different than travel in its own right? We're hoping they're going to walk away as just better rounded individuals. In trying to identify who's not going abroad, we recognize that certain majors, such as our STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math majors, are underrepresented. We notice first-generation college students are underrepresented, Pell Grant recipients, and racially and ethnically diverse students are underrepresented. So all these students, I should clarify, Pell recipients are actually higher financial needs students. So recognizing that these students have unique barriers to an education abroad, we started chipping away at the curricular barriers, maybe at the social and cultural barriers, looking at financial barriers, and also just trying to build better programming and infrastructure that students felt included and welcomed into the education abroad experience. So probably one of the biggest impacts we've made and we continue to work towards is to create more financial assistance for students. So in the last year, we would have given away about $700,000 in scholarships and grants for students that have financial need or are also merit recipients. That is a lot of money, and that's an annual amount that we've managed to pull together thanks to the generosity of donors, from departments, from programs we partner with, from the work we've done to prepare students for international and nationally competitive scholarships. So we've done a lot of efforts, and yet when we look at the overall data, we still have a lot of gaps to fill, so that the students that apply for scholarships, about 1 in 3 actually get an award, and the average award amounts are about $2,000. And when you look at the range of program prices, sometimes $2,000 will get them there, and sometimes that's barely even a start. Thanks, Derek. And I'll pass over to Derek to talk about the last year and what the pandemic has done to our programming.
Hello, everyone. As Laura noted, I'm going to spend a couple slides talking about the pandemic's impacts on education abroad here at CSU. I think that can be best summarized as it's been a challenging year for education abroad in general, but we've also learned a lot over the past year. I think that's true not only in education abroad as a field, but as international travelers more generally, and just informing ourselves about what the risks and resources are around the world. I also, thinking about this, I realized it's a unique time of risk awareness. And that's exciting for me because as CSU's International Risk Manager, my goal is to foster informed travel among our stakeholders. And I'm optimistic that we can build this awareness that this pandemic has brought into our lives about international travel and risk. And these experiences can be incorporated into our travel planning long after the pandemic subsides. In spring 20, we had over 300 students who returned from abroad because of closing borders and risks of COVID. And many aspects of this initial response period were just entirely unprecedented. One that comes to mind is the State Department issuing a worldwide level 4 travel advisory. And this is a designation that's typically reserved for extreme risk countries. So that was unprecedented. And we just saw so many restrictions so quickly across the globe. Due to these rapid mobility restrictions, students needed to depart from abroad immediately. Some did end up needing to be repatriated, which is a government process that we would certainly always want to avoid, but some utilized. And some did end up staying abroad for a variety of reasons, depending on the destination and their own support networks in country. But the vast majority of students made it home quite quickly. And again, we supported that return. For summer 20, and I should also note that for spring 20, we did ensure that students were able to maintain academic continuity. So universities rapidly transitioned to online coursework. The vast majority, and for those that couldn't, CSU Global stepped in to help make sure students were staying on track for graduation, which is something that we were really appreciative of, just make sure that that already disruptive semester wasn't disrupting their academic graduation plans. So then on to summer 20, we saw the pandemic continue to impact undergraduate study abroad, as well as our graduate students programming. We do a lot of graduate student research over the summer. We just saw a lot of ongoing border restrictions and overall uncertainties about how the virus spreads, and that made it really generally impossible to send students abroad, and that continued to impact our programming in a really significant way. For fall 20 and then into 2021, we've really carefully considered a matrix of criteria for planning travel, and that includes guidance from the Department of State, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. We've done a lot of benchmarking with other universities. We've thought a lot about how to incorporate the learning objectives into our programming in a pandemic era. So we put together these matrices of determining if we can run programming, what that programming will look like. But it became clear that as we did these exercises, that travel remained a logistically challenging and generally higher risk endeavor. However, during this period, students have been given the opportunity to petition for essential travel, and a handful have been approved on a case-by-case basis. So looking back at the past year, really travel has been quite restricted. We've sent very few students abroad. However, by utilizing the familiarity that we have as education abroad professionals with our international travel resources, and by supporting the students that were able to go, we've really developed a robust review process and identified the questions to ask ourselves as we're planning this pandemic era travel. And this has been extraordinarily helpful as programming has began to pick back up in 2021. I should also note that during this period, a handful of our partners overseas have been hosting students, not just CSU students, but other students. And that's helped us learn a lot about what running programming in this pandemic era looks like. So one area that we have been continuing to run programming is at the Todos Santos Center. Lost my notes here for that one. One moment. The Todos Santos Center is an international extension of Colorado State University, located just about an hour north of Cabo San Lucas, right on the Pacific Ocean. There's about 8,000 citizens in that community. It's a really quiet and diverse place with a wide breadth of natural and cultural activities for our students. The center has offered a variety of programming for several years that serves both local and international learners, and has quickly become the most traveled to destination for CSU students. During the pandemic, Mexico has utilized their stoplight system, which is something that they previously implemented during hurricane season and other large-scale emergencies. And at a level 5, which is orange on the stoplights, the center is able to phase in reopening and put in critical COVID precautions, but slowly phase in programming again. Since then, Baja California has gone to a lower level below orange, and it's at currently yellow. And it remains a Department of State's level 3 and a CDC level 4, but we've slowly started to see programming return there. Because in large part of this relationship between CSU and the center, the relative proximity to Fort Collins, the limited travel restrictions that have been initiated between the US and Mexico, this is one location where we've continued to have some programming. And this is in large part thanks to Dr. Danielle Fry, who will be joining us later in this presentation to talk about her experiences leading some of our Doctor of Veterinary Medicine students to the center quite recently. Another program I want to highlight that I'm sure many of you are familiar with is CSU's Academic Partners Semester at Sea. In a typical year, we have about 500 to 600 students from across the country on each voyage. They visit 12 to 14 ports over the course of the semester around the world. Spring 2020 was a particularly challenging first semester at sea, and as an important partner to our university, the entire community was saddened by seeing the voyage face significant restrictions in port access. And after several weeks of detours and complications, they ended the voyage approximately 2 months early, which was a difficult decision at the time, but certainly in retrospect, the right one. Because of cruise industry and port restrictions, Semester at Sea has been unable to sail since that time, but the fall 21 voyage is in motion. They've initiated mandatory vaccination for all voyagers for the fall 21. And there's various health and safety considerations in place, and really just fostering an ongoing spirit of resiliency and enthusiasm for returning to international travel in a safe and different way. So moving on to the future, in summer 21, we're really, I think, entering a new phase of the pandemic. I saw an interesting statistic actually just yesterday that at the current rate, the US is on track to vaccinate over 75% of our population within the next 3 months. Chile within 4 months, the EU within 1 year, and South Africa within the next 10 years. And this is all based on current vaccination rates. So clearly we'll see that while vaccinations are being made available, it's not going to be universal. It's not going to be equitably distributed. That's something we're certainly incorporating into our planning processes. I also think there's a lot of talk about vaccine passports, which has been interesting to incorporate into our planning process. And I recognize that in certain countries, the pandemic will be in a different place in 3 months from now and 6 months from now, but that's going to be on a really case-by-case basis. However, at the global level, I think vaccination at this point still isn't a panacea, and travel really needs to be assessed on that country-by-country, student-by-student basis. And this is because there's a number of considerations for what risks need to be mitigated before students can travel, ranging in everything from limited quarantine, can those learning objectives be met? What does our emergency response plan look like within the pandemic? And these are some of the specifics I'll talk on in the next slide. For fall 21, and I'm really reflecting on the conversations I've been having with students and other stakeholders. I think the main thing I've been talking about and thinking about is that while we're going to be seeing more vaccinated travel, that does not mean that travel is back to normal, back to pre-pandemic era. This is because getting sick is just one concern, and certainly it's a major concern, but there are many other logistical and higher risk considerations to incorporate into our travel planning. Going into 2022, we're just kind of continued awareness of social distancing and other safety measures. And until that science says otherwise, we're really operating within that pandemic precautions and kind of planning for that worst case scenario, and then hopefully can dial that back as we enter into this kind of new normal. And for some time, study abroad will look not the same as it has in the past, but that does not mean that these important learning objectives can't be met. It does not mean there can't be an impactful experience. It just looks a little bit different than it has in the past. So long before the pandemic, CSU had an international travel oversight committee, and this is an advisory group that evaluates higher risk travel. And over the course of the past year, this advisory group that I chair has really been activated to help us think about how we can reactivate education abroad in as safe way as possible. This committee, again, pre-pandemic, has always been tasked with asking critical questions to ensure everyone is aware of the risks, accept those risks, and has good plans for risk mitigation. And because all international destinations, give or take, are now at that higher risk level, this committee has played a really significant role in this planning process. So these are kind of some of the buckets that we're looking at. One of them being travel restrictions. And over the past year, I think this has really been about closed borders and arrival quarantines. But in the coming months, I think vaccination status will play a larger role in those travel restrictions. For example, in Ecuador and in Iceland and soon Thailand, you can skip quarantine if you're vaccinated. And that's something that, again, will be in flux, and we'll see, I think, different countries navigate in different ways. Of course, we're looking closely at institutional guidance, not just from CSU, but from other like partner institutions from across the US. CSU does maintain a restriction on non-essential travel, and that has been, of course, incorporated into our travel planning processes. And again, we're looking at other institutions and how they're navigating this pandemic. In terms of healthcare indicators, we look about general healthcare access in country pre-pandemic, but also how that healthcare infrastructure has navigated the pandemic and the various waves that we've seen across the world. We also look very closely at access to testing and the ability to receive test results within the 72-hour window to be able to re-enter the US. So not only is healthcare available for COVID, how's the healthcare capacity looking if someone got sick, regardless of COVID status, and then making sure that testing is available to return to the US. Personal considerations, we all have a different level of comfort with travel. We all have a different level of comfort of travel in a pandemic. So really kind of sussing out that personal risk tolerance, thinking critically about pre-existing conditions and how that could put us at greater risk when we're traveling abroad. We're looking really critically at program design and learning outcomes. How can the program be done successfully within the pandemic environment? If there's still curfews, if there's still mobility restrictions, how we're making sure our students can have the experience that we hope they will have, just maybe in a more limited but informed way. And that kind of ties into those conditions on the ground. Again, what is going on in country? How's the government responding? And how can we run the program within the limitations of whatever restrictions may be in place? Or how can we not run that program if the limitations are too severe? And then finally, as we're thinking about reactivating education abroad, again, access to vaccines and testing. And that's just not here in the US, but internationally. And again, recognizing that the world's in very different places, depending on which country we're looking at. Laura, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Derek. So that kind of gives you an idea of at least how we were making decisions, and they were not easy decisions, and it's ongoing. So I'm going to pivot a little bit and just remind us all of why international learning is so important. As you can read this quote from a student who was abroad in spring 2022, that even though she left months early from her experience in Spain, this is what she has to say, right? That it's still transformative. It was still transformative. It is still transformative, and it can be sometimes one of the most impactful memories that students might have of their time at CSU. I hope those of you that have had an international experience and international education also carry those memories very close to your heart, and just know that through all this, we still have a lot of great memories and a lot of great stories. And if anything, these students will really be able to share some very unforgettable memories that are related to a pandemic. So years later, it will be an interesting story, to say the least. So thanks, Derek. Great. So now let's get into the nitty-gritty of probably what you want to know. What resources could you reference the most often to help you make informed decisions? And we really wanted you to have resources because making decisions to travel internationally is not a blanket approach, right? That every single country is responding to the pandemic differently, and you need to inform yourself as much as you possibly can. I would say the next year is going to be sticky, and so these resources are really, go ahead. Yeah, these resources are really going to help you to just think through it. So first thing, as you're planning your travel, these are important questions that we were asking students, and we were telling them as well. If you are going to be going abroad, build this into your decision making and your overall structures. Like I say, wait as long as you can to make those, big commitments, the big financial outlays such as deposits, airfare, and other expenses. The longer you can wait, the closer you'll get to your departure time, and you'll see what's happening. And thankfully, airfare is relatively low right now for around the world. Also, learn about your insurance. One thing that we learned from this year is that a lot of insurances have a pandemic exclusion. So that doesn't mean that you wouldn't be treated if you had a medical condition related to getting coronavirus. However, a lot of the evacuation coverages are limited, so that if you are abroad and you think, well, I'll just fly home if things get complicated, read the fine print. A lot of the insurances have a pandemic exclusion, so that it's an out-of-pocket expense to return early, which nearly every single one of our students last spring was caught in that dilemma. Also, just read carefully, because occasionally some insurances might be building in new clauses about pandemic coverage for medical procedures. So just be informed, make informed decisions, get backup insurance if you need it. Also, there are some insurances such as cancel for any reason insurance. Read the fine print on those as well. A lot of times they'll say cancel for any reason, and then they'll have 15 exclusions as to what the reason should be. So, or limitations on what you might actually get. So it's a very expensive insurance, and sometimes the returns aren't so great. Doesn't mean you shouldn't shop around. Just know that there's some fine print being built into a lot of insurances right now that makes it harder to travel during a pandemic. Obviously, looking into testing, right? So can you get tested before you leave, as well as can you get tested before you get back on your flight, and figure out where that is. It'll reduce a lot of stress as you're getting ready to go. You don't want to figure that out last minute and then have any delays. Also think carefully about, what if I did get exposed and I haven't had my vaccine yet and I tested positive? What would your plan be? Do you have a hotel close by, or friends, or someplace to stay that would be comfortable, while you're recovering, or at least getting to the point of testing negative, because we know a lot of people might be testing positive but maybe asymptomatic. And then obviously, like I say, Derek already mentioned, assess your personal risk tolerance, right? You will be able to go abroad. We know our students will be able to go abroad again, and some of it is this the right time, or do you wait 6 months to a year until more of the world has had the vaccine and we get closer to herd immunity? And then finally, do involve your emergency contacts in whatever you're planning. We've had to engage emergency contacts more this year than we ever have. While we're preparing adults to have an international experience, we recognize there's a lot of people that love them, and that if things got complicated, they would like to be involved in at least the decision-making process and thinking about what's the best plan for whatever eventuality there may be. And if you're going abroad, please be sure to send us photos. That's a highlight of everything we do. Thanks, Derek. And here are a lot of the resources we use on a regular basis when we're making decisions. Derek's already highlighted several of them. And I'd say the top three, the U.S. Department of State, CDC, and embassies, they have the best current information for you to reference that is really helpful and very timely. I think we've noticed the first updates come through those resources, and the most reliable updates come through those resources. For the Department of State, definitely take the time to register with the STEP program, which is the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program. And when you go to travel.state.gov, it is the first thing that pops up is on that landing page. It's great because you'll get emergency alerts through the Department of State. So whenever, if anything big is happening, they'll send an email or sometimes even a text message to let you know what's going on. Like I say, if there's been an outbreak or there've been a riot or some other kind of social conflict, whatever's happening, it's great anytime you're traveling anywhere in the world. We always recommend students sign up for STEP. CDC has a great list of recommended vaccines and information about travel during coronavirus. And I do say you can take the time to read through the website because it's a wealth of resources. And don't forget, like if you are going a little off the beaten path, make sure you get all your vaccines, right? Many countries still have to deal with things like yellow fever, malaria, dengue fever, some pretty hefty diseases that we've not been able to stop, so that they have their own epidemics happening. So once again, you have the opportunity as a U.S. citizen usually to get these vaccines as well and have a little more peace of mind. Plus, during a pandemic, you don't want to be competing for bed space, when other hospitals are pretty maxed out trying to support the coronavirus needs. U.S. Embassy is great, and you can see the three at the bottom. These are more .com resources, but they're helpful. So the first one is the International Air Travel Association. So this is what a lot of pilots use and air industry uses to make travel decisions and stay informed in kind of a central location. It's a great interactive map. I just read a great National Geographic special edition. Also talked about travel during the pandemic and had some nice little anecdotes and other resources. And then the COVID travel entry info. Once again, there's a lot of new websites out there that are helping to kind of connect travelers with immediate resources. I always say, look at those ones at the bottom as a resource, but then always go to the Department of State or the embassy to get the most current and accurate information.
Yeah, I just want to add a quick note just to really highlight, these are all great resources, but the U.S. Embassy especially is kind of, we got some preliminary questions from the audience, and one of them was kind of what's your one-stop shop and for information. And I would say if you Google U.S. Embassy South Korea, for example, and then go to the COVID-19 response page, you'll get a lot of information about, Laura kind of was talking earlier, like where do you get tested? They'll tell you where you can get tested in South Korea. They'll also tell you what would happen if you got a positive test. In some countries, that means mandatory government quarantine. In other countries, it means something else. So I would say the U.S. Embassy in your destination countries is a great resource. Of all these are great resources, but that one in particular.
Agreed. Thank you, Derek. Once again, another warm student comment. Once again, not to discourage at all. Like I say, we're chomping at the bit to get back out there and doing a lot to inform ourselves in the meantime. So we're all hoping that to see more and more students going abroad with every semester, and then, like say, international travelers just enjoying this great world that we have. All right, so let's go ahead and pivot to our guests for tonight. Derek, go ahead. So we have kind of three different groups represented here. The first one we're going to share with you is Claudia, who is a student studying abroad currently in France. She is there for the semester, and she wasn't able to join us because it is the middle of the night, so she recorded a short video. We'll show that in a second. But I also wanted to introduce briefly some of our guests who are joining us from New Zealand. So it is actually tomorrow in New Zealand, and we have Bleeker and Christopher, who are there with their child in New Zealand. They've been in Lincoln, New Zealand for the last year and a half through the entire pandemic. So I'm really excited to hear what their experiences are. And then, as Derek mentioned, Dr. Danielle Fry is here, and she's in a photo with her colleague Elia Rosana Alvarez, who is also a veterinarian in Mexico. Danielle just returned from leading a group of students abroad in Mexico. So really looking forward to what their experiences are. And let's go ahead, if Dakota, if you didn't mind just loading Claudia's presentation.
Hello, everybody. My name is Claudia. I am studying in Aix-en-Provence, France, and I am a psychology major at CSU, but I am taking history classes here. To prepare for studying abroad this semester, we had to put in a petition process to CSU to make sure that we knew what we were getting ourselves into, and just research COVID in our country of choice, and obviously make sure that our study abroad programs were still going through. Some of the biggest surprises coming to France were my housing situation. I was expecting a normal college university dorm room and ended up in this beautiful traditional French apartment from the 18th century, which is super awesome. Also, you hear rumors that the French people are not very nice, but everybody in X is super kind and loves to work with you on your French and help you improve, and it's an awesome place to learn French. All the food here is also super fresh, which is a good surprise. Everything is almost farm to table. It all comes from local places, and they have a farmer's market here every day that you can stop by and pick up your fresh produce. My highlight of being in France so far has just been getting to know so many wonderful people. Everybody in my program is amazing. My roommates are amazing. All the other international students that we've been meeting are amazing, and it's so awesome that we still get to meet all these wonderful people even though we have to take COVID precautions. To help other students going abroad this year prepare, I would just let them know that you have to be ready for the COVID situation to change at any time. Sometimes new restrictions will be put in place, sometimes they will be let up on a little bit. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit different from studying abroad on a normal year, but there is still so much to do and learn and experience in a different country, and it is most definitely worth it to go through with the study abroad process through COVID. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, great. Well, that was definitely nice to see one of our students, and I love seeing we're human beings. This is great. So as I mentioned, Christopher and Bleecker are joining us from New Zealand, and Danielle Fry is joining us from Fort Collins. So I've prepared a couple questions, so we'll kind of go through the questions, have each of you answer as I ask them, and we might go a little off script depending on how things unfold. So Christopher and Bleecker, would you please share where you are and what took you there and what you're doing?
Absolutely. Can you hear us first and foremost?
Perfect.
Check. Yes. So right now we're actually on the North Island of New Zealand in our mid-semester break, but we're enjoying being here. What brought us here was me studying abroad through Colorado State University there. So thank you to the Study Abroad, Education Abroad and International Affairs program. It's been incredible. We came here with the intent of bringing the whole family, a beautiful wife and our young 4-year-old son, to be here for a year. And so then when things, ramped up the way that they did, we insisted that we would rather stay since we'd already gone through all of the, arrangements to make sure to have housing, vehicles, any and everything that you would have for a family. And so we've been able to take advantage of it. And through all the coordinated efforts, we've been able to extend that to allow for more credits to be permitted through my program.
Thank you. And it's just exciting to think of how everything's unfolded and you've been in such a unique place. Danielle, will you share your experiences internationally?
Definitely. So as you guys mentioned, I am in between 2 trips actually, leading veterinary students to the Todos Santos Center. We get to do community outreach, working with local NGOs and government veterinary partners to provide support in spay-neuter programs all around Baja California Sur. And I'd also like to mention that while we have successfully had that program go, I've also been a part of a number of programs that have canceled over the last year. And so the country by country, student by student approach has been really helpful to assess destinations and learning outcomes and when is the right time to go and who to go with. And so with Todos Santos, I have 5 years of experience in the community, so I was able to rely on our partnerships down there to make it successful and safe for everybody to participate.
you. Thank you. And how did you prepare for your time abroad?
Oh, do you want me to go? Is it me? Oh, Christopher.
Yeah, maybe I'll go back to Christopher. We'll do it that way. Christopher Bleeker, any special?
So I did most of the preparation, so I'll answer this part. I mean, obviously the visa application was pretty extensive, especially bringing a family. There was kind of New Zealand in particular, I guess. I was told that it's to prevent sex trafficking, so it kind of made it a little bit easier for me to accept it. But you have to provide extensive proof that you are in a legitimate kind of what they call it, a genuine and stable relationship. So a marriage certificate is not enough. And so that was, and we actually had to do that again when we reapplied for another visa. So it's so that was one kind of big thing. We also, because we were going over as a family, we had to find housing. Lincoln University didn't have housing for us, and so we had to figure out where we were going to live, and so that was sort of, we'd started preparing for that before we got here, because we wanted to have a place to live when we got here. We didn't want to have to live in temporary housing, and so I guess it's mainly that, and then just planning out. I mean, I guess we also planned out some of our travel and stuff. We did a month in Australia before we came to New Zealand. So we kind of wanted to plan out some of that stuff. But I know we here in New Zealand, we had Dr. Steve Newman as the kind of the faculty advisor. And so he was really helpful when we had questions about, bank accounts and things like that. He just said, you know what, I know what to do. Just deal with it when you get there. So that prevented us from having to spend a lot of time before we left worrying about those things. So yeah.
Great. Thank you. And I have to say that we've all been jealous this whole time when you opted not to come back to the US. And now I see this beautiful blue sky behind you and green grass, and I'm even more envious. So,
and we're at a camper van now, so that's why we're out in the middle of a field, because
Love it.
So.
Good.
Okay,
And Danielle, tell us how you prepared.
Excellent. Yeah, so our situation was a little bit different, because I wanted to really take into consideration, we were doing outreach into some low-income communities that could be considered higher risk. And a lot of our program is based on interacting with community members directly. And I was highly, highly worried about what does it look like for us to come down from the United States and still interact in this program. And so the very first step that I had was actually Elia Rosana, who you mentioned as my partner down there. I had her make sure to check in with every single one of our partners, who actually had been asking for multiple months, when are we coming back, but to make sure that it was okay that we came back. And then to really ensure that in collaboration with our partners, we created protocols that everybody could follow and feel safe and comfortable with, because the community outreach and safety part was so important that I wasn't going to go if that wasn't a piece. And I could turn to the students and say, this isn't possible to make happen. But our partners have been so gracious to be able to work together with us to create these protocols and ensure safety for everyone. So that was step one. And then another really interesting piece was touching on what Derek discussed, which was your personal considerations for risk and risk management. And so navigating myself and my own, and then making sure to take each of my adorably gung-ho, ready to go students through the process. And actually, that was my perception that they were all going to be that, but we had 24 students scheduled, and only 13 are able to make it happen. And so they all were given the opportunity to withdraw from the program based on their scheduling and their personal risk. And so I don't know, not everybody disclosed what that was. A lot of it is the really tight scheduling that our veterinary program has. And so we had to navigate schedules, personal risk, prior health risks and challenges and all of that. And then I think, on top of everything Derek already mentioned, is this constant flow and flexibility of communication, and working from a place where, we're concrete in what we're going to do. And also we know everything can change at any given moment. And so we have to be constantly working as a team. And so, grateful to have international abroad work that way. Our team in Todos Santos work that way, and just constantly moving and flowing with everything. On top of maybe for the first part of the time, obsessively checking the levels and risks and state departments and 4, 3, 2, 9. What color are we on the stoplight? Nobody knows. There's 7 colors on the stoplight. And then just being okay and trusting what was going to happen, because we put everything we could into place to make the safest decisions and these protocols. And then I'm going to speak just for a moment on, again, to this piece on in the preparation part, to the places I didn't go. And that was talking to some of my partners in site and new partners in site, specifically in South Africa and Zimbabwe, about what the real situation was there, which was a little bit different than how you looked when I looked at all those great resources. And then I was, communicating with people on the ground and their ability to withstand us coming and their view of what things were happening on the ground. And that was really informative to help me decide to cancel that course. And so, like I said, just trying to balance, hey, here's one that we did make happen, and here's another one that we chose to not make the decision to go, because, like you said, South Africa in 10 years time might be 75% vaccinated. It's not necessarily right for us to go in there when we don't know what our vaccination, when at the time we didn't know what our vaccination status was, and to do community outreach in risk situations. And so that is the shortest snippet I can give you of some of the things that we did to prepare for this, which was months and months and miles of email communication. So anyway, yeah.
Oh, so true. Thank you, Danielle. And I really I want to just stress, I really appreciate you stressing that delicate balance too, of recognizing, where people are at on the ground, right? And talking to people that are there and what they're experiencing to help assess what seems right. We did start 6 months ago, or no, 9 months ago, trying to figure out what could be. And it wasn't just a quick decision by any means. And we spent a lot of time talking with students too about you're going to be entering this as an ambassador, right? You're traveling and people are going to say, there's someone from the US. Make sure, say that you're being as thoughtful to that opportunity as you can be, and that we're not spreading the virus unknowingly. So thank you. Good. Well, Christopher, now we've got the whole family. Very nice to see. Welcome. Would you tell us, maybe just in the interest of time, what's been a highlight of your year, especially now your year and a half in New Zealand, especially during the pandemic? Hope you're on mute. You're on mute, actually. Sorry.
Sorry.
All right.
So the viticulture program, which is a horticultural elective for me, so being able to make wine here in New Zealand was an incredible opportunity and quite unique given the circumstances around it. And then also being able to be involved now with undergrad research as well, but more specifically to New Zealand and travel. We were just discussing, you want to talk about some of the highlights?
Yeah. What did we say? We did an overnight on Doubtful Sound, which is, one of the fjords here, which was just really kind of spectacular. We went down to Stewart Island, which apparently, it's the most untouched part of New Zealand that you can get to. And apparently a lot of Kiwis, New Zealanders, don't ever get down there. We know people that lived in Invercargill, which is it's just a boat right away, and they've never been. And so some of that, and just basically kind of the going to the top of the North Island and the bottom of the South Island, and and that's been really nice. And then making friends too. We've made friends all over. We have friends in Auckland and in New Plymouth, and we have friends all over New Zealand now, which is really kind of cool. So
great. And just for clarification, so it sounds like your life has been pretty unrestricted in New Zealand through most of the pandemic.
So we had about, I want to say the really strict lockdown was about 8 weeks. It was probably about, less than about 2 months of real lockdown. And it was very stricter than anything that the US had. Restaurants couldn't even do takeout. You would get a ticket if you were anywhere outside of between your house and the closest grocery store. You really could not go anywhere or do anything. And so, police were patrolling the neighborhoods to make sure that people weren't congregating and hanging out in their yards. It was really very strict. But after that, we don't have COVID here. you know, and when there have been a couple of outbreaks, they lock it down, you know, they shut it down, they quarantine, they isolate, and they don't let it spread. And so so for the most part, we've had, you know, very little restrictions on travel. You know, you have to wear face coverings on public transport, airplanes, things like that. They do have a tracer app that is not, people don't use nearly as much as they probably should, but that's really it. We've been able to freely travel for most of the time that we've been here.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful to hear. And also see, like, say, one of the benefits of an island, if it's handled appropriately, how much freedom you have. We spend a lot of time trying to educate students on quarantine looks different depending on where you're at. We've definitely talked to colleagues in, for example, Ireland, where it's a 5-kilometer radius that you're allowed to move within, right? When it's stay-at-home orders, you know, you can't just hop in your car and drive to Denver for shopping. You really have to stay within a very, very tight circle and really only focus on necessities. So that's interesting to hear that was a similar reality in New Zealand. Danielle, how about for you? What's been a highlight, and also just maybe preparations that you'd want others to know about?
Excellent. Well, gosh, for me, I'd been away from my friends and colleagues for a year during a really stressful time. So I will almost cry right now. It was so good to see my humans and the animals that I've worked with. And then also to get to reconnect with taking students through the journey of travel and working with communities and, you know, the actual, you know, the other educational piece, which is, you know, building their skills and confidence in them as they're about to go into the world as professionals. And so I got to really reconnect with all that. And that was awesome. None of that is actually COVID related, but that was a highlight to just get back to it. And so, and to show that it could be done. And, you know, in preparation, I think my biggest thing is, I had to write it down because it's a little complicated. It's don't be afraid, and it's go and enjoy, but be prepared to be respectful and follow the local guidelines, because like you were saying before, right, we're ambassadors for, it's a big mantle to carry when you travel internationally. You're yourself, you're your institution or where you're from, and you're your country, and that's a big responsibility. And so you have to take that forward and be really respectful, because the United States is having a different experience through the pandemic than New Zealand or South Africa or Mexico. And the people that you're visiting have had a very different experience. And so being open and respecting that their experience has been different, and that also the impacts of the pandemic might not be visible to you. And so, you know, when we were down there as tourists, you know, we still were in the tourist category, even though we were doing work. I had to ask my local partners a little bit deeper, because I couldn't see where things were different. And you can't see what businesses are closed or who's suffering from the restrictions differently. And so I was curious about it and respectful to it. And it's different for everybody. Just like we know here, it's different for everybody. When we go to different countries, everyone's having a different recovery experience. And so go, learn, embrace, be warm, and just follow everyone's rules and be okay with that.
For sure. Thank you. Well, I noticed we have this long line of questions coming, and I'm just going to do a quick scan to see if any might be very particular to you. But actually, let's go ahead and we'll put you off the hot seat. But are there just any parting words you have for our listeners, so our alumni from all over the state and the country? Christopher?
Just wanted to say thank you so much for all the effort, all the support throughout everything in preparation for being able to get here before anything, you know, really transpired COVID-wise, and and then even throughout, it's just been, you know, so surreal for us to be able to have this experience, and through the support and understanding that everybody has that's contributed to us being able to be here and have this experience. Please know that we want anyone and everyone who's interested to be able to just jump right in. And as Danielle was alluding to, just kind of don't be too afraid, you know, understand you have those cautions, but just get into it and know that you're going to have support of people that you didn't even think were going to be able to influence in a major way. So thank you to everyone for that.
Oh, that's awesome. And that warms my heart. You moved mountains to make this happen. Most people don't get their entire family to go with them abroad. So kudos to you, and I hope other people are listening to recognize you can do anything if you put your mind to it. So glad we could help. Danielle, any parting words or thoughts?
You know, it takes a network and a community to make things happen. I mean, for the rest of life. And so embrace your network and communicate with people and be a part of it and be a part of the community. And when you go, whatever role you take, just being so open and wide-eyed and looking up and around and being there with the people, it's the best thing that we can do, is to be in other places. And so just enjoy it when you go, and make sure you include your community and network in being there with you. Thanks again for having me, and thanks for all your support, of course. You know, we probably have 3 more meetings this week, and so I appreciate all of it.
We'll see you soon. Good. Well, thank you. Thank you to our visitors. We appreciate you being here. We'll go ahead and pivot because there were questions coming in. So maybe Derek, you can help tag team these with me because you're even more of an expert. Let's see. So there's a question, I don't know if we can answer this, about how can travelers assure safe and accurate test results in foreign countries? Do you have any advice to that, Derek?
I can only say access to testing in terms of safety, it's going to be so site specific, and then accuracy, I think that just depends on the test that's available. Currently, there's certain tests that you need to take to be able to return to the US. They're called diagnostic tests. So accuracy is pretty universal. So I guess that would be one thing. But then where you can get those tests, you can find that information. If you Google US Embassy in that country, most destinations will specifically list where testing is available. So I would go with that guidance available through the US Embassy on their website. In recognition that it's liable to change, you want to have a plan A, plan B, a plan C to make sure you're getting tested before you return to the US. Otherwise, you'll be turned around at the border.
Thank you. And kind of related to that, someone asked if will health insurance cover testing in other countries?
Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, every insurance plan is going to be different, but generally speaking, insurance will only cover testing if it's ordered by a doctor. So if you're just getting tested to comply with entry requirements, if you're getting tested just for peace of mind, generally that would not be covered by international insurance. Versus if you're symptomatic and the doctor ordered the test, that'd be different. So generally not for entry.
True. Yep. Thank you. And we've noticed with some countries it can be several $100s. So these are these things you can't plan for that you need to budget for sure.
And I think about the UK right now. They have a travel testing package that needs to be purchased, and you need to purchase 2 tests up front, and I think it's 220 pounds, 300 pounds, something like that. So it's quite expensive. So yeah, great point, Laura. It very much, testing cost very much so varies by country.
Yeah. One general question, we may have addressed this already, but talking about outlook for Europe this summer. I think the biggest thing for Europe is it's changing all the time. We just got out of Easter around the world. There's a big uptick. We just noticed Italy is shut down for the rest of the month, with more information to come about summer. So it's going to depend. I think that everyone should be of the mindset you might have a quarantine, and 2 weeks, on your vacation of sitting in a hotel room is probably not what you signed up for. But that can change as well. Summer's looking better for sure. But we're also making plans that if a student needed to be quarantined, that we could still offer a program that would be worthwhile for them.
I want to make sure I was clear earlier. Those projections on 75% vaccination status is based on current numbers. The EU has been a little bit slower to get the vaccine out than previously anticipated, but I do anticipate that ramping up. But I do think summer will be a bit challenging, unfortunately. I also recognize that I think the EU will prioritize intra-EU travel travel before opening up more widely to tourism, especially recognizing that the US maintains a restriction on Schengen citizens coming to the US, and that's kind of a reciprocal. So if the US maintains that restriction, which was reinstated by the Biden administration, I do wonder if the EU will allow American tourists in until that goes away. So it's kind of a who goes first type of situation.
Thank you. And then just in the interest of time, we'll answer one more quick question. And then we do have a nice video at the end, so don't leave. You can also see that Derek and I can both be found on our website, which is international.colostate.edu. If you want to email us later, if you have more specific questions, we're happy to answer those or connect you with resources to help you make informed decisions. But as I say, one last question. What does it look like for the world cruising in 2022? So hard to say. I think a lot of it depends on strains and what's coming next. Our partners with Semester at Sea are currently pivoting their entire itinerary to focus more around Europe. So they're going to cruise around Europe where normally they'd cover whole continents, but they're going to loop around Europe and then go through the Suez Canal and just briefly dip into that part of the world. But it's not looking so good for fall. I think it'll be a little tenuous for a while. Hopefully 2022 it's a lot better, but as you can imagine, it's especially vulnerable travel reality just because you're in such tight quarters, and yet I know the cruise industry is doing everything they can to think about how to plan, how to prepare, how to socially distance and self-isolate. So we'll wrap up for there, and thank you for joining us.
Okay. Thank you all so much for being here. I want to take a quick moment to thank Laura, Derek, Danielle, Christopher, and Bleeker. We appreciate your time and all of your insights so much. All of our audience members, if you have a moment to fill out the post-event survey, like I said, your feedback would be greatly appreciated. It will be linked in the comments here shortly. And like Laura mentioned, we are going to send you off with a short video, so stick around to view that. But we hope that you have a great evening. Stay safe, stay stalwart, and go Rams.